Corla, I'd like to raise with the Minister for European Affairs the horrific and tragic case in Morocco that came to light recently where a 16-year-old child, a girl, her name was Amina Filal, committed suicide after being pressurised by a Moroccan court and her mother to marry her rapist. While the marriage was seen to be required for cultural and religious reasons and by some to avoid any damage to the family's honour, the impetus to resolve rape cases in this way is also prompted by aspects of Morocco's penal code, which allows a rapist of a minor to shield himself from prosecution if he marries his victim. The relevant part of the penal code is Article 475. Her father was against the marriage but was pressurised by the court to agree to it. One can only imagine, Minister, the psychological trauma visited on the family and the child having to marry her own rapist. After the marriage, she was severely beaten by her rapist and her mother over a period of 3.5 months. Then on the 10th of March, this child took her own life after swallowing 60 cents worth of rat poison. Women's group in Morocco have been protesting outside the parliament in Rabat, calling for an inquiry into this case and to repeal Article 475. They rightly point out that marriage is not the solution for rape, which is a crime, in this case, that went unpunished. Minister, this week we're deciding on whether or not to bring gender quotas to improve the participation of women in politics in Ireland. Our history in this regard and the treatment of equality of women is certainly not without blemish, an example of which we heard last week on the matter of symphysiostomy. We've travelled far and we still have some way to go. However, I respect the fact that we have to have due regard to cultural sensitivities and be cautious to avoid mistakes and the evils of the colonialism committed by other countries in the past, which are often rooted in arrogance. We still owe it to those who are struggling around the world for justice. We should also recognise that poverty and the lack of education opportunities are at the heart of much of this, particularly in the case of these women. In the midst of our own financial and economic difficulties, we should also be mindful of the obligations to those living in desperate poverty around the world, and particularly this family that are affected in Morocco. Minister, I call on you to calling the Moroccan representative to this country. I'm asking you as a fellow parliamentarian to indicate our displeasure and to add your voice to a call to have this reprehensible law repealed. Further on that, I would ask you as the Minister for European Affairs for this country to encourage your European colleagues and itself the European Union to bear as much political pressure as possible on Morocco to repeal a law that provides for a situation where a rapist can rape a minor and have an exit strategy as a consequence of a provision of a civil law. I find that disgusting, reprehensible, and I'm asking you as our Minister for European Affairs to take whatever action necessary on behalf of this country and this House to highlight it to the authorities from Morocco in this country and in the European affairs.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Corla, and I'd like to thank Deputy Keaveney for bringing this really horrendous case to the attention of the Dáil, and I'm sure that I speak for everybody in this House in expressing my horror at the details of the case of Amina Filali. She was raped, as the Deputy rightly points out, and then forced to marry her assailant so as to prevent him from being prosecuted for his appalling and heinous crime. She then suffered severe beating at the hands of the man who raped her and subsequently married her, and we can have no understanding of the depth of despair that Amina suffered that drove her to take her own life. She was stripped of her rights and she was punished for the wrongs of her abuser. She was abandoned and neglected by the legal system that should protect vulnerable members of society. She was left without the promise of a future She was only 16. Women have played an important role in the momentous changes that we have seen across the Arab world in the last 12 months. They have stood shoulder to shoulder with their brothers and husbands and demanded freedom and equality. Their demands extend to gender equality and protection under the law. Strong encouragement needs to be provided by the European Union and other international actors to ensure that real benefits flow from the Arab Spring for women, and that their overall position is advanced in Morocco and in other countries undergoing reform and change. Morocco has in recent years taken some steps to empower women in Moroccan society. The adoption of the Family Code in 2004 was a major milestone in improving the protection of women's rights in Morocco, including by raising the age of marriage to 18 and prohibiting polygamy. The new Moroccan constitution, which was adopted by referendum last year, has for the first time recognised gender equality. These are steps in the right direction, but it remains clear that Morocco must take further steps to protect women that have been the victims of rape or domestic violence, including the repeal of Article 475, which permits such an appalling miscarriage of justice as was suffered by Amina. Her death was a heartbreaking tragedy, but her death has resonated considerably within Moroccan society and galvanised many Moroccans to seek changes to this draconian law. I fully support the calls of human rights defenders in Morocco and elsewhere in seeking an immediate repeal of Article 475, and I also strongly urge the Moroccan authorities to launch a full investigation into the death of Amina and the important issues which it clearly raises. Morocco will undergo the second review of its human rights obligations and commitments as part of the Universal Periodic Review process at the next session commencing in May of this year. Ireland and our EU partners will engage with Morocco in the course of its UPR on the human rights situation in Morocco, including recommendations on necessary reforms to its penal code to ensure greater protection of women and reforms required to provide greater equality and empowerment of women in Moroccan society. Ireland is committed to the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women, and is involved in a variety of initiatives at international level to this end, such as playing an active role in the negotiation and adoption of resolutions at the UN General Assembly and the UN Human Rights Council aimed at promoting the rights of women and girls. Ireland was to the fore in promoting the establishment of UN Women, the new UN agency working for gender equality and women's empowerment, and has provided over €1.8 million since its establishment last year for its work in developing countries.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Keaveney.
I'd like to thank Corla, the Minister, for her objective, well-researched, honest response. And Minister, I call on you as a fellow Oireachtas member who I know shares my concern to call in the authorities of Morocco to this House. I'm sure it's a man, hardly a woman to be called in from Morocco. Well, I'd be grateful if you call in the man from Morocco to your offices and to outline the palpable outrage of decent people in Ireland who are ashamed that in a contemporary, alleged civilised society, that courts of justice would provide for an escape route for rapists to marry their own victim in order to save, for some cultural reason, face for a family. That form of abuse, Minister, cannot be provided for anywhere in any society. And I ask you to take whatever action necessary as our Minister for European Affairs to represent with great ferocity our concern around this issue. This is an innocent child, as Cancorla, who, for a reason beyond our own imagination, was forced to marry her own rapist. 3 years, 3 months, I stand corrected, 3 months imprisoned in a horrific forced relationship beaten consistently, and the only way out was to take her own life. And I'm asking you, Minister, to call in the Moroccan officials who are attached to the mission in Ireland.
Thank you.
And ask them what are their plans to repeal this awful, awful situation.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, and thank you once again, Deputy, for your contribution. I have no problem, either myself or the Taoiseach, one or other of us, calling in the Ambassador, and I will discuss it with the Taoiseach, because I think, as you rightly say, that this is a matter of such grave concern that it does behove the Irish Government to take strong and decisive action. So I have no problem doing that. There's no doubt that the widespread concern which this particular case has raised across the international community is very real. In many ways, the case of Amina Filali can be compared to that of Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia or Wael Ghonim in Egypt, in how it has helped to highlight the urgent need for reform and greater promotion and defence of human rights for those in countries in the Middle East and North Africa undergoing huge transformation which has come about in the wake of the Arab Spring. The important leadership role played by women in advocating for democratic reform and greater human rights in those countries which have experienced the Arab Spring has been much commented upon. Indeed, the Taoiseach himself referred to the striking and inspirational leadership role played by women in promoting the Arab Spring when he addressed the UN General Assembly last September. Ireland has been active in arguing at both EU and UN level that particular attention needs to be paid to promoting and safeguarding women's rights and the position of women within those societies in measuring the real degree of change taking place in those countries which are undergoing transition. Strong encouragement needs to be provided by the EU and other international actors to ensure that real benefits actually flow from the Arab Spring for women and that their overall position is advanced in those countries undergoing reform and change. In the case of Morocco, it is important to note that a process of change has commenced in the country in the wake of the Arab Spring and in response to popular demands and protests which have thankfully been peaceful overall. A new government headed by the moderate Islamist PJD, the Party for Justice and Development, has taken office following last November's parliamentary elections. A new constitution also came into operation last July, and King Mohammed VI, who continues to exercise much influence in the country's governance, has identified judicial reform as one of his priorities, and that is to be welcomed. Ireland, along with our EU partners, will continue to strongly encourage Morocco along a path of reform and democratic change. The EU already has an active human rights dialogue with Morocco as part of the EU-Morocco Association Agreement. Ireland will ensure that these structures are fully utilised to press Morocco to do more to improve its overall human rights record and to undertake the kind of fundamental reforms which will ensure that human tragedies such as that of Amina Filali do not reoccur.
Thank you, Minister.